Hi, Adrian. Welcome to SLASOG Leaders or Readers. I'm so glad you're here. Let me just quickly introduce you. So, Adrian Stoch is a transformative supply chain leader with a 33-year track record of delivering breakthrough results for some of the world's most complex operations. Known for blending deep automation expertise with a relentless focus on operational excellence, Adrian has led global turnarounds, pioneered industry-first robotics programs, and driven measurable gains in safety, speed, reliability, and cost efficiency. Now, as CEO for Robotics, he is committed to reshaping the automation landscape, helping customers accelerate growth, strengthen resilience, and achieve unmatched performance through innovative, reliable, and customer-obsessed solutions. In my book Data Impact, I wrote about several companies, and one of them was GXO, where Adrian was Chief Automation Officer. And so it's super nice to speak with you, Adrian. I'm so excited you're moving to Robotics. And let me start with my favorite question, which is, what's your fundamental disagreement with the status quo? Why are you doing what you're doing now?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Ritavan. Super excited to have this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed your book, Data Impact. A lot of your points really resonated. Some of your observations and perspectives on Brad Jacobs, the founder and chairman of GXO, was spot on and really resonated. So super happy for this conversation. And so to get to your question, I know you like data, and I'll answer that question by giving you just one statistic, and the statistic is 100%. And what that represents is the extent of large-scale implementations that fail to hit the mark in some way. And now the spectrum is very broad. Sometimes it misses the mark by a very small portion. Maybe it doesn't get the productivities in the expected time frame. It takes a little bit longer, or it could be catastrophic. And but the reality is that all large-scale implementations, because of the complexity, because of the lack of experience with people who are implementing it or operators on the receiving end, fails to meet the mark. I'm now taking this opportunity to really fix it from the inside. And, I've seen it so many times from customers of GXO, these failed implementations. It's actually, ironically, a big source of revenue and opportunity for GXO through a concept of takeover in place, where these failed implementations result in a customer having to hand it over to a very experienced, very knowledgeable company like GXO. And I've just seen so many extreme examples where the automation, the solution has failed the customer. It's big opportunity for GXO, and now I intend to come on the real inside of this problem and fix it through Robotics. It's a big pain point, and I aim to fix it.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge challenge, but also super exciting, especially given your unique perspective and your unique experience over the last years working, at leading automation at the largest third-party logistics provider. Before we continue, I think it's always nice to, get to know the person, the leader. And so it'd be nice if you could sort of, dig in a little deeper into your life story, your origin story, what made you who you are, whether it's, your childhood dinner table conversations. I know there's a lot of sports in there. So yeah, enlighten us.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an immigrant. I came to the United States in 1994 from South Africa after having grown up in the horrific apartheid system. It's the ultimate unfortunate system of privilege, of white privilege, and I got to benefit from that. It wasn't part of my intent and part of my design, but I grew up in that terrible environment. And I carry that burden in my career and in my life. And I feel a great responsibility and burden to give back and give opportunity to as many people, mostly young people, as possible, to give opportunities in their career, in their development, in training, not necessarily formal education, but helping people understand how to negotiate and navigate a career. And I see that as my responsibility, and it's what drives me. So yes, of course, in business, I want to be successful. I want to be results oriented. I want to, grow my customers, be very valuable to my customers, and grow their organizations, grow my company internally. But ultimately, it's the development of people through this kind of intrinsic responsibility that I feel for development and giving opportunities.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I mean, I'm an immigrant too, multiple times even. And if it weren't for all those people who bet on me early, who gave me a chance, I wouldn't be where I am. And I think that's such a noble pursuit in life. And now, in every small way, I try to give back to. And I think what was sort of testament of this for me was to see the massive response you got from your community of people, on LinkedIn when whom you've mentored, the way they reacted about your new role. And I think that kind of also just shows that this is not something that's just said, but it's lived. So with this, let's move on to the first section, which is save, right? So the idea is really to figure out what sort of challenge orthodoxy and expose hidden efficiencies, and sort of start by not doing certain things instead of just trying to do more, which is often the usual response. So you've said that many execs don't truly understand what strategy means. How does groupthink manifest in those in those sort of strategic conversations, and what does it cost companies in real terms?
Yeah, so firstly, I want to clarify what I mean when I say that maybe it's some executives don't truly understand what strategy is. I've seen so many times, whether it's internal to a company or through consultants, a strategy definition session, and then a strategy becomes a PowerPoint slide or a few PowerPoint slide that's a statement about an aspirational future state, and it's a narrative and it's a text. That's a good start, but that's not for me what strategy is. Strategy must be actionable. It must be defined in a very specific plan that is well articulated and cascaded throughout the organization, such that every person, and I mean that literally, every person, every employee in the organization understands their role with respect to the strategy. Now, it varies, right? I don't expect a shop floor operator running a piece of equipment or using material handling equipment or just doing manual labor to understand the full strategy and everything that the senior leaders would need to understand, and the executives. But what I do believe very strongly is when I'm in the field, which I am a lot, as a field leader, you can't fix problems and you can't lead from a home office. You need to be with your teams in the field, fixing problems, supporting, removing obstacles. And so when I'm doing site visits, I'm having a lot of conversations. I'm having conversations with the site leaders, with line supervisors, and with shop floor operators. And I'm asking very pointed questions about what their understanding is of certain elements of the strategy. I'll give you an example, and it's an extreme example, but I think it'll land the point. It was actually during my time at Target. There was a big focus in our strategy on fast startups at the beginning of shifts or at the end of breaks. Those fast starts, when you have 10 or 15 minutes and folks aren't getting back to their tasks, when we're dealing with 100 employees or multiple hundreds of employees, sometimes over 1,000, that's real loss of productivity. And it was a big focus on how we were working with the teams, because you can't just direct people and say, hey, you got to get back to your task. You've got to do it in a very collaborative and team-based approach. I would ask the hourly folks, what is your understanding of what our perspectives are and our strategies around doing fast starts? And if people didn't know what I was talking about, and sometimes my accent, it's fast starts in the South, and people didn't really understand even what I was talking about, that tells me a lot. It tells me either very positively that the site leader is really understanding and cascading and articulating that strategy down to their team. If folks are sorry, I don't know what you mean, that tells me a lot as well. And so for me, that understanding, that perspective, and having the ability from a senior leadership position to cascade and articulate throughout the organization to every employee, that's what strategy is to me. Now, there's a long rambling answer on just clarifying, but now onto groupthink. Ritavan, as I've mentioned to you, you've really challenged my own thinking on this. And I typically over-index on inclusivity when it comes to big strategic decision-making. But I agree with you that this can lead to suboptimal decisions and strategic direction. And even if you're just slightly off on strategic direction, it can have a very big impact. And I've thought about some of the strategy sessions that I've had in my past, and I've been sitting in the room scratching my head going, this isn't going where I wanted it to go. But because I've facilitated this over-indexing on inclusivity, I couldn't very well then all of a sudden take a dictatorial approach. And so, yes, you've really challenged me on how do I incorporate commander intent in conjunction with inclusivity and have a balanced perspective on this.
Yeah, no, I think it's always such a spectrum where you want to make sure you don't end up in groupthink. At the same time, you also want to take everyone along. And what you described about site visits sort of reminds me in my research on the book about this anecdote of Napoleon, how he would sort of make sure the orders that were sent to the troops would be read out to an old illiterate soldier, and read out because, of course, the soldier is illiterate. And so if this rank and file soldier can interpret the orders back, then they would be sent out, and otherwise they would be rewritten until this person understood exactly the intent of the orders. And I think that is so important. And you sort of opened my eyes to rugby and Rassi Erasmus. And so, do you want to share some stories? Because I think the military sports, these are all environments where you cannot just incentivize someone, with a bonus, or, it's about sort of really inspiring people to act together towards a common goal, and which is, I think, the ultimate sort of success that you can also have when leading a company.
Yeah, absolutely. I could answer this question in hours and days on passionate perspective, but I'll try and keep it concise and really to the point. And since reading Data Impact, I've really challenged myself and tried to think really critically on how to find this balance. And so, yes, I'm going to speak about sports because I'm very curious. I'm very curious about situations, and there are many of them, where you've got a losing team or a suboptimal performing team, and one change is made. Coach, a manager, one change is made in a significant leadership position, and very soon, not over a long period of time, very soon, the performance of the team is transformed. There's so many examples. Phil Jackson at the Bulls, Andy Reid at Kansas City. Across the pond, you've got Klopp at Liverpool, Pep at Man City. There's so many examples, and there'll be a number of similarities across these examples, including structure, culture, discipline, and emphasis on alignment. And that's where I'm going to double click into my personal passion in this area. You mentioned rugby and Rassi Erasmus, who's the current coach of my favorite team, the South African Springboks. And the success that Rassi has had has been unparalleled in terms of transforming a team around. So let me describe what he inherited. He took over the team as head coach in 2018 after the Springboks had gone through its worst period in history. Traditionally, the Springboks are a powerhouse team, and we had suffered very recently record defeats against New Zealand, 57-0, against Ireland, and even losing to a second-tier nation like Italy. For additional context, South Africa is a rugby mad nation, and this would have had actual pain and hurt to millions of fans, including myself. Within 18 months of taking over, Rassi had led the Springboks to winning the World Cup in Japan in 2019. He followed it up 4 years later, winning in France in 2023, and in between won multiple rugby championships, national competitions, and had instituted development programs which had elevated through grassroots to improve the youth divisions. The under-20 side won the global championship for the first time this year in 13 years. So those were his achievements. Now I'm going to talk about some of the how and why I'm using this mindset, this approach in how I'm thinking about adjusting and achieving my balance. Rassi introduced a number of completely revolutionary components to his leadership and to the squad using commander intent. These are the things we're going to do. But then he did something else that was completely transformational. He introduced the concept of alignment camps. So traditionally when season starts, the squad is out there on the training ground. Fitness is the priority, and the first week or 2 weeks is all around fitness and conditioning. Rassi didn't do that. First 3 days, 4 days, the squad is in a conference room setting, in a town hall setting, where it's open discussion. It is completely safe space. And Rassi rolled out to the team, presented to the team, the non-negotiables. These are the things we're going to be doing. And in his first iteration of this, he did the following. He had a circle, and in the middle of the circle, it had the word winning. And that for me is putting the customer at the center of everything, because his customers are the fans. So winning is everything as far as this mindset was concerned. And then he had 3 spokes leading into the winning: squad depth, experience, and transformation. And all 3 of these and his perspective of them were controversial in certain ways, but he wanted to be upfront with his squad, with his team, and be very transparent. For example, transformation, a very sensitive topic in South Africa, again, going back to the apartheid system. It's been just over 30 years since that was abolished and Nelson Mandela was released. But the country is still going through a lot of transformative pains. And transformation is a very sensitive topic, and it can mean different things to different people. Rassie didn't want anyone guessing what it meant, and he told the team exactly what it meant to him. Another element of like mind-blowing change was squad depth. Previously, the way that it would work in the mindset was there was a first team, second team, third. If you weren't in the first team, you were a first team player. Rassie completely flipped that script, and he presented and said, you can't win World Cups and you can't win consistently in rugby championships without squad depth. And if you're in the squad, that's what it means. That means that you are good enough to play for the Springboks. And it even reached the point where, and he writes about this in his book, where one of the players who had been selected for a game on the Saturday came to him and said, you know, it's this other player's 50th game on Saturday. And that other player was on the substitute bench, meaning he wouldn't run out with the team at the start of the game. These milestone caps, they're called caps in rugby parlance, these milestone caps like your 50th, your 100th, these are big deals for these guys. And they typically lead the team out. And this player was selected, said, please give my place to this other player and let him lead the team out on Saturday. That would never have existed before. And so what you've got me to do is think differently about my approach and incorporating commander in tip, putting the customer at the middle, doing whatever my strategic spokes are going to be, and then saying to my team, all right, folks, this is how we're going to do it. Let's work out together the details, the tactics, and let's have conversations on where you have questions, where you have concerns, but these are the things we're going to be doing.
Yeah, that sounds really fantastic. And which kind of leads to the next thing, right? Which is leverage, meaning you can't copy your way to success. It's not like, Rassie looked left and right and saw what the other coaches in other countries were doing, because the cards you are dealt are unique to you, right? And you're playing in a competitive landscape. And so you want to leverage your, unfair, unique advantages, right? You want to find the non-obvious sources of advantage, and you want to capitalize on them to win. And so in the context of, High, and, now that you be reading High Robotics USA, and the robotics market is dominated by large players. So how are you thinking about leveraging High's unique assets, right? Their legacy, their non-digital advantages to win?
So this answer came to me well before I even knew there was an opportunity to join High as a customer of Highs, and I met the founder Richie and was listening to his perspective, and he was talking about his approach to innovation being very customer centric. And this was revolutionary at the time for me to hear, because the traditional players, the big market leaders, they come to the market with a solution. And if you think about some of them, I'm not going to mention these companies, but their solutions are box shaped. They're literally box shaped. And so it forces them and their customers to think in the limitations inside their box. Richie didn't do this when we had this conversation, and he was talking to me about what are your true needs and how can I work with my team to innovate and iterate our solution to meet your needs. And this was a very different approach. And this happened in one of my buildings, at one of our mutual customer sites. And again, this was a very refreshing approach. I'd never met with a CEO of a technology company in one of my sites, and just the optics of that and that experience was completely different. And what Richie and his team have done is High's ability to innovate with a customer perspective is unparalleled. The solutions that I've seen come up just in now the last 12 months that I've been talking to the team and considering joining. This is the main reason from a technology perspective. There's reasons from a value and a culture that I'm very attracted to High and to the leadership team and Richie. But from a technical and innovation, their ability to innovate and with a customer perspective is unparalleled. What has attracted me to High as a vendor first, and now as a company I'm going to be working with.
Yeah, and I think given the 100%, failure rates of some sort, this clearly shows that the industry needs this. And you mentioned sort of shaking up the industry, because, you were on the receiving end for so many years, and now you felt the pain like almost no one has at that scale. And so when you shake up this industry, what forms of counter positioning do you plan to use against larger incumbents?
Yeah, and I want to clarify, and I'm glad you said that, because I have felt some of the pain, but it's really what I've seen from companies, customers outside of GXO, because GXO has a big advantage over industry customers, the customers of GXO. And maybe I should do a bit of definition about what GXO does for some of your listeners. It's the largest pure play contract logistics company in the world, meaning they do warehouse outsourcing. So GXO's customers would come to GXO with a big supply chain problem, maybe fueled by growth needs, or their legacy manual environment doesn't suit any longer, or in these painful situations where they've done an automation implementation and it's not working. That's what I talk about when I say I've been exposed to a lot of customers who've gone through pain of automation implementations. GXO's got a massive advantage because there's so much knowledge and experience within the company to fix these big audacious problems. So yes, I've felt some of it, but it's more just seeing the impact that this has on customers' supply chains. And, we saw during COVID when product wasn't able to be put on the shelves for global macro conditions, when it's your own supply chain that's breaking down, this costs careers. And so this kind of ties into the answer to your question, because it's a massive point that these macro conditions that have been impacting global supply chains are only going to increase and accelerate, like labor availability, cost of labor, nearshoring. I mentioned global disruptions. This isn't going to slow down. These things have only been increasing and being more pronounced. And so the ability to be able to be very flexible and customer-centric in your responses, as opposed to having the conversation that I've had so many times with these automation vendors is, oh, this is what our solution does. This is what our solution does. And then the customer's got to adopt their processes. It always lands up with suboptimal workarounds and other manual processes, which is so ironic in an automation setting. And the kind of positioning of High to be, we will be innovative, but based on customers' needs. And there's points going on within the organization at a more detailed level, which I don't think is appropriate for now, but there are some very specific tactics that the company is going through on how to be able to achieve this, because this is not an easy concept by any means, to be customer centric in your innovation because of scalability, right? It's much more easy to scale a very standardized product. High has been able to figure this out and crack this very complex code.
Yeah, I think this is something that sort of Jeff Bezos spoke about at Amazon. He's like, I want to focus on that which will not change in 10 years and work backwards from there, because people will always want things faster, will want a bigger range of things, etc. And I think if you sort of get to that crux of the customer pain and find, the few levers that drive it and work backwards and solve for that, then you don't care, what happens quarter on quarter. That's there we come sort of to the alignment part and sort of having a clear metric that, overarching metric, something like a North Star metric that everyone aligns around, that is longer term, that sort of makes you focus on the big wins, on the long wins, and not, small sort of the next goal that's short, right? It's like it's the long haul. And so what are your thoughts on that? And can you share examples of how you intend to apply this to High? How do you want to rally your troops and play the long game? Because that's the one worth playing.
Yeah, I'm smiling inside, and maybe it's coming through in my facial expression as well, because when I read this section in your book, it was late at night and my family was sleeping, but I was like, yes, this is exactly right. That this concept of a leading metric that's actionable and can be connected to everyone in the organization, and everyone understanding how they impact on this leading metric. I've worked in companies before where the main focus of the organization is something financial, quarterly or monthly profit, EBITDA, whatever the case is. Or this is a flawed approach in my opinion, my perspective. And you describe this exactly in data impact. Of course, from a lagging perspective, those are the critical metrics, those financial metrics, the outcomes are extremely important. I want to make sure that that's clear. But those aren't directly actionable. You cannot connect your strategic action plan against those outcome lagging metrics. You need an identifiable leading. And so in High's case, it's going to be connected to customer value, which is also not an easy outcome to achieve, because different customers will have different priorities. A lot of the time it'll be around improved productivity, but it could be cycle time, it could be fulfillment, it could be their customer NPS, for example. But whatever it is, it's in High's context, we will have a normalized approach on how we view this customer metric. And so we can have different individual customer outcomes that will then roll up to this individual metric. But I will rally everyone against this. We will be customer obsessed. And you asked me before in some of our discussions, how will I be pivoting the organization? I don't have to pivot this company. The company is already very much focused and very customer centric. It's adding in these elements of structure and methodology that I'm bringing to the organization. I want to mention what I call this methodology. It's called the golden thread. It was something that I was introduced, unfortunately, decades ago as part of my lean manufacturing background, and it manifests in a lean context through a methodology component called Hoshinkanri. And the golden thread is an expansion of that, of which this North Star leading metric is a core component that is connected optically using the golden thread throughout the organization.
Yeah, no, I think, and I also have to give credit where it's due. I'm not the one who sort of conceived the idea of the North Star metric. It's credited to Sean Ellis, on the startup growth side, to Alistair Kroll and Ben Yoskowitz in their book Lean Analytics sort of had this one metric that matters idea. Matt Lerner writes about it. So I think this is something that software startups have been forced to obsess about because, as we all know, when they start out, there is no financial metric to speak about. So you have to look at something that's forward looking. But I think, when you want to really create value at scale in a data-driven way, then it's a nice metric to use even in industrial companies, in industrial contexts. And, once you have this alignment, I think something that's super important then is to make sure you simplify, because what happens is, people sort of think, complexity is a bad thing, etc. But if you think about it, complexity is born through problem solving. Something breaks somewhere, someone tries to fix it. It's like putting some scotch tape, some band-aid to keep the thing together. And then you repeat that over time, you repeat that at scale. And that's how complexity is born. And so problem solving, which is the error correcting mechanism, ends up being the problem, right? Because there is no self-correcting mechanism to correct the self-correcting mechanism. And I think that's why it has to come from the top. I think this is something that, this is very much a CEO concern, to try to bring to sort of almost force simplification in processes in the org. So what are your thoughts on that? And where do you think complexity really ends up killing execution in your industry?
Yeah, I think this is a huge point of relevance. And what I've seen so often is where the engineers, the vendor, has implemented a robotic solution that may work well within the confines of the black box, but doesn't facilitate overall or total building flow. So total building flow in a warehouse context is where the product is moving at the right pace, at the right cadence throughout the entire warehouse without blockages, without backlog or pinch points. And when a vendor, a solution designer, an engineer looks at their piece of that overall total building only through the lens of their robots, that's where the complexity breaks down. And I'll give a couple of examples. In one instance of a building that we went to go visit, the automation could outpace the downstream processes by a factor of about 80%, which was mind-blowing to look at because it's such an obvious design parameter to get right. If the automation can process 1,000 units an hour, well, then you need the downstream processes to at least be able to do 1,000 units an hour. In that case, the building downstream processes was doing about 250 to 300, which is crazy to think about. What that meant was that the conveyor that connected the automation to these downstream pack stations was always jammed. Another extreme example was where the solution that had been implemented, only 70% of the product could fit in the totes. Again, it's a mind-blowing thing to think about in terms of such a simple error. But when the engineers are not thinking about the overall building and the needs of the total building, this is where it breaks down, when they're just looking at their own perspective. And I've had a number of uncomfortable conversations with vendors and with engineers where their perspective is, look, the robots are moving. Our job is done. That's when the job is starting. To your point on problem solving, that's when the continuous improvement starts. That's when the true trust between the customer and the vendor really starts. And when the vendor's got to be there to help problem solve, because they've got all the expertise, not the customer. We need to teach the customer, of course, and over time they will get that. But when that switch is turned on, that's when the true trust between the customer and the vendor has to kick in.
Yeah, I'm so glad you shared these examples because, I mean, if you look at sort of industrial processes, I think you can break down a process into steps and then try to that's sort of your divide and conquer. You optimize, improve each step, and then you aggregate it together and the overall thing works out. In the digital space, when it comes to user journeys, right, you can also think in terms of use cases, sort of cut up the user journey, improve them, and then the overall user journey improves. But now we're in the data driven, we also have the data driven paradigm, and the problem there is if you cut up something along one of these traditional axes, it breaks the flow. Like the unit of value creation in data is a decision, like the impact of a decision, right? And so what you want to do is optimize that overall. And so when you say, look, the robots are working, but hey, if the overall thing is not working, that it's not creating value, and it's so important to sort of keep that in mind. And in that context, right, optimization is not just optimizing the robotic arm or optimizing a technology product. It's optimizing the overall value created. And to sort of make it a bit more concrete, I think what happens very often when optimizing is, we live in a complex world with a lot of uncertainty, or with different types of uncertainty. And what people try to very often do is, sort of try to model it away. So have a very simplistic model of the world where they don't take uncertainty into account correctly. So my question to you in a supply chain context and a warehouse automation context is, what do you see as the irreducible uncertainties that leaders should embrace rather than try to eliminate?
Well, let me start off by saying that supply chain simplicity just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There are so many factors that go into getting a customer's product from design through manufacturing, then through the supply chain, where I come in. And even in those supply chain elements, the handoffs between the freight handlers, the deconsolidators, the middle mile, the warehousing, the last mile, the nodes of complexity are maximum, and uncertainty is a given. And the notion to design for simplicity and for predictability is a misconception. Our solutions need to be resilient and flexible and embrace the fact that things are going to occur that are unexpected. And we have an obligation to design for that. Now, of course, with improved forecasting capabilities and AI, and we pulled off some of this at GXO by actually improving on customers' forecasts through AI. Yes, that can get better and it can get more predictable, but uncertainty will always happen. It can be at a global level, or it could be something quite specific. I'll give a very fun example. We had at GXO a cosmetic customer, and they were discontinuing a certain lipstick, and an influencer, and the young lady wasn't necessarily a big influencer, but she had a bit of a TikTok following, was bemoaning the fact she'd found out about this lipstick that had been discontinued, and she said she was going to her local store and she was going to buy up all of this product from her local stores. This video went viral, and this product that they were about to discontinue became their biggest seller that year. We had to manage that, and we had to be very flexible in response. And when I was speaking to the customer, she was scratching her head going, yeah, my performance, my revenue is at the whim of a 16-year-old girl in New England. And I didn't even know this person existed before this video came out and went viral. These things are happening all over. We're so globally impacted. Influencers, informal influencers on social networks are so impactful, and we need to build our supply chains to be able to respond to that.
Yeah, at the end, I think the speed with which information traveled from the consumer market and demand all the way down to, the production chain was much slower earlier. And I think with networks, with platforms, that's changed. And, Sangeet Paul Chaudhary, who I also sort of quote in my book, and who's just written a book called Reshuffle, and he speaks about how AI restacks the economy. One example, poignant example that he gives is Shein, the Chinese fashion company. And and it's like their entire decision making is algorithmic, so they're constantly scanning for what's happening on social media, and what are the influencers saying, etc. And then they have sort of automated decision making all the way to creating small batches of product, testing it, etc. And I think that adaptability, that ability to sort of accept the uncertainties and adapt around them is I think where the edge lies. So thanks for that real life example, because hear all of that, it's you read it once in a while, but it's just great to hear it from someone who's been operating in the space for so long. So yeah, let's move.
Before we move on, I want to seize this moment, because we didn't orchestrate what you just said and what I'm about to respond with. Shein is one of High's biggest customers, and their incredible growth into the US market could only have been achieved if they had the right partners. Their automation partner, if you go into a Shein warehouse in Ohio, you will see a very significant High Robotics solution that is running the Shein operation in the United States, and many of their warehouses globally as well. I just launched in Poland, number in China. And this point you raised, Shein specifically selected High because of some of these points that I've been raising. High's ability to innovate, create solutions, manufacture in completely compressed timelines, and be responsive to its customers' needs is the exact reason why Shein selected High, and why Shein has been able to achieve such incredible growth.
Yeah, I think going forward, if your customer is so fast, adaptive, and is data driven in their decision making, all the way from reacting to customer trends in real time down to producing in batches, testing, etc., then as a robotics warehouse vendor, you have to sort of keep up to that clock speed. You cannot be working on 12-month cycles and iterations when they're working on a daily basis. And I think sort of aligning that clock speed is so critical, which really brings us to the whole point of doing all of this is growth at the end, right? So you want to focus on your customers' demand. You want to embrace an abundance mindset, because there's just so much opportunity out there today for what you can do. And so in that context, you mentioned that there's a lack of customer obsession in the industry. How do you plan to rewire High Robotics around this customer demand, instead of internal supply constraints, instead of engineering saying, oh, this is possible or that is possible, this is what we can offer?
Yeah, it's not a rewiring. And I attended last week in Atlanta. It was just very good timing that the team got together, the sales team and business development team and marketing folks got together, and I had the opportunity to spend 2 days with the team. And what became very clear is that this perspective on customer obsession already exists. And so it's not a rewiring by any means. It's maybe taking the blue and making it a bit tighter with the red, or something like that. But it's not a complete rewiring. That listening to what the team shared about their experiences with their sales processes, with their follow up, with their post sales support. This is probably going to be one of the easiest things that I'm going to be doing in the company, is taking this kind of this raw template of what exists already and making it even more effective and more obsessed around what we're going to be doing with the structures and the processes that I'm going to be putting in place. But this isn't a cultural change. It's more structural.
Yeah, it's great to hear that, because if it weren't the case, I think it would be a really uphill climb and it wouldn't be fun. I think this sounds like a lot of fun. Like you really kind of, it's this yin yang kind of fit here. And so, to wrap it up, something that's so important is embracing an abundance mindset, because very often, you have all the elements in front of you to create value, but what holds you back is not seeing the abundance, right? So what does abundance mindset mean to you as the CEO of High Robotics in the US, and how do you intend to instill that mindset across your team, right, and across your partners, your vendors, and everyone else, everyone you work with?
Yeah, so let's just think about what's happened within the warehouse robotics landscape, the industry as a whole, for the last 10 years. Because before that, there was very little, arguably nothing. Amazon engaged with Kiva, ultimately bought Kiva. That transaction only occurred 10 years ago. When I joined Target, we were experimenting with at the time, brand new technologies. I remember visiting the pilot site for Target, and there was a Six Rivers truck going around the warehouse at the time. No one knew what it was. Now, collaborative robots, those mobile carts, are a mature technology. But all of that has only occurred over the last 10 years. So what does that mean in terms of an abundance mindset? The vast majority of warehouses in the United States are still manual. And even where there is automation, it's partial automation within the warehouse. Maybe one or two processes as opposed to the entire warehouse is automated. And so the opportunity for growth and the addressable market is still huge. And there is still apprehension. And for the reasons that I've been discussing around disappointments with automation, there's apprehension with executives and C-suite to make these huge investments in automation. But that's changing, that's easing. And as solutions get more reliable, continue to mature even further, we're going to be heading towards more of a must do as opposed to an option. A lot of the times when customers decide they're going to move forward with the large scale automation, which is essentially a huge business transformation exercise, they feel like that there's really no way that they can stay in their manual environment. This could be through growth needs, could be through consolidation of supply chain, through labor availability. They feel like they're forced into a situation where they have to make this decision. That is only going to continue. I spoke about it earlier on in our discussion around these macro influences that are only going to increase. And more customers are going to feel that there is no choice but to automate. And there is such a big addressable market, and continuing to educate the potential customer base and carrying this brand that when you engage with High Robotics, you're engaging with a solution that works, which means your building will work from end to end. And we don't just look at it from the point of view of our black box that we're implementing.
Yeah, and I think, and we didn't discuss, or I didn't know about this, but like the fact that you guys are doing it for Sheen, I think is sort of like, there's nothing more to say after that. I think the way, at the end, the warehouse, the supply chain was all about adapting to demand, and the ones who can do it at the fastest clock speeds are the ones that are going to win in the market for a whole bunch of reasons, not just because they can adapt to demand and capture demand, but also because they have less wastage, right? So it's not like you trying to move around product and then try to find ways to sell it, and sometimes you do, due to price pressures, etc., you struggle in the market, in a competitive market. But the fact that you're able to really sort of drive decision making from demand towards supply and do that in a fast, adaptive way, I think is sort of by definition the ones that are going to win. And it's so exciting to see that you're moving into this new role. Actually, I wrote about the automation, at GXO. You were the one driving it. We'd never spoken before that. I did all of this based on publicly available information. It was, it's an honor. It was really exciting to speak with you, to unpack all of this. And I learned so much from you, especially also about leadership, rugby, Rassi Erasmus, and I really enjoyed prepping for this. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and I wish you all the best, and I'm mad excited to see what you build, and hope to have you on again in a year or two to speak about the wins that you've achieved.
Well, thank you, Ritavan. It's been an absolute pleasure, and for sure you've shaped my thinking, and some of the things that I'll be doing in leading High Robotics are through your influence. So thank you very much as well.